be quiet a minute, I tell you.
You gotta turn up now. Well, what are you doing here?
If you'll just stop screaming at her, she'll explain, Dad. Surprise!
Seeing Hayley Mills next to herself did more than surprise her on-screen parents. It unveiled groundbreaking visual effects that were both astonishing and invisible.
You're not sisters. I've never seen her before in my life.
They are. Aren't they?
No, ma'am. Just lookalikes.
An amazing resemblance.
What Walt wanted was that you were not aware of the special effects. One of his common things was, he said, people won't notice that we didn't quite get what we wanted, but they're suddenly going to be back in the theater. They're going to notice the people sitting around them. That's what happens, and I don't want that to happen in my pictures.
To make sure it didn't, Walt turned to UB iWorks. UB broke new ground in animation with the first sketches of Mickey Mouse, and pioneered photographic techniques that helped make the screen as broad as our imagination.
Here's a man who never even finished high school, and yet he never quit studying. I mean, he read on and on and on, and anything that challenged him, he then studied it and became an expert on it.
UB was considered the top photographic effects man at the studio, and whenever any new challenge came into Walt's lap, he would always look to UB to solve it.
Do you want to meet Father? And I'm just dying to know Mother. Well, what if... Oh my gosh! She's simply so scary that we might be able to pull it off.
Before the picture ever started, they had a board up in front of them with storyboards, sketches of each scene, and both Walt and David would act out the parts that were being portrayed, scene by scene by scene.
I had no idea how to shoot twins when I came on this show, but there's a marvelous camera department at Disney's, and the cameraman knew all about it, so I just relaxed and said, these are going to be twins, and she's going to be here, and she's going to be here. He said, no problem.
They would continuously turn to UB and say, now, UB, is this possible? And I knew he eventually was going to turn to me and say, okay, Bob, now I said we could do it, so we do it.
The primary visual effect technique that UB used to place Hayley Mills on screen with herself is known as a split screen.
Okay.
We would shoot the scene twice. We would shoot it, and we would have an actress double standing where the other twin would normally be standing.
And then we'd change clothes and switch wigs and try not to move any of the furniture around. And then you'd film the other part of the screen.
The camera was really secured so that even though the two scenes were shot 20 minutes apart, everything was still exactly the same. The camera hadn't moved, and the set hadn't moved, and the lights hadn't moved.
The two strips of film were then rephotographed, one frame at a time, in a device called an optical printer.
What we would do on the optical printer is we would shoot two different exposures. One exposure would be the girl on the left with a matte blacking out the right side so no light hit the film, and then we would back the camera film back, and then we would shoot a second exposure on the same film with the matte on the left side, and now what you have is a complete scene.
It's got to be done methodically. Remember the key, recollection and memory. Get her talking about how she and Daddy first met and their first date. Find out about that first date.
To avoid a visible line between the two Haleys, splits were concealed by background elements such as tent poles, door frames, or bedposts.
And if that edge doesn't go right exactly together, it's going to be a giveaway. So if there was anything in the scene where we could make the split come down the edge of a picture and then maybe go over the top of her head, we took advantage of that, but we could throw that just slightly out of focus so it was a soft edge, so it wasn't just a sharp line right down through the middle of a sky or the middle of a living room wall.
Another key to hiding the split was making sure that each Haley stayed on her own side.
We would have footprints drawn on the floor of the set, and we would rehearse it on and make sure that she was going to be able to do all of her actions and stay behind the line.
Let's get together right away. Will we advertise the fun?
and we could move the split screen. Say, as one of the girls would run out of the scene, and then the other one would run out following her, we would move the mat across just behind the girl running out so that there was room for the girl following her.
Haley Mills, I understand, was very keen on exactly how to act and where to position herself, and she not only had to look screen right, but she had to immediately turn around and look screen left and interact with her imaginary self.
I was having to work with a photographic double and then switch and then play the part that I'd just done and work again with my photographic double. Very, very well played by Susan Henning.
The actress really has to sell it. Her eyes would have to be looking in a spot that would be right in line. That was always a challenge to make it work. And that's why we used this double, because then she was really looking at what is herself in the final scene.
I actually learned the whole script, both Susan and Sharon parts, and we would alternate positions at different times. The funny part, my birth name being Susan, and the two characters were Susan and Sharon. And then, of course, Susan and Sharon in the movie switch places. So oftentimes it would be Susan playing Susan, who's playing Sharon, and Haley playing Sharon, who's playing Susan, and poor David would get, now who are we now, and what is she, who are you now, and Susan, are you Susan playing Sharon?
Oh my gosh, I just had the craziest dream. Oh my goodness. What is it? You and I were marching on real slow, sort of funny like, in organdy dresses. And there was music coming from someplace.
In the wedding scene, they were walking down this path together. Haley Mills walked down one side of the walk, and then she went back and came down the other side of the walk. They had to walk really straight so they couldn't move through the split because they're walking right next to each other. And the metronome was beating, and on a certain beat, the girl on the left would smile or turn and look at her sister on the other side. And then when she came down as the girl on the other side, we had the same metronome timing. And as a result, when we put the two of them together, they both turned and looked at each other.
Split screens provided the visual payoffs that convinced audiences there were two Haleys. But many scenes were filmed without visual effects.
When you saw the two of them talking, and there would be a shoulder or side view or a three-quarter, that other twin was myself.
Over the shoulder shot is the back of one girl's head shooting at Haley Mills, and when we came around, we would reverse the positions of the two girls.
And they would do that in every case they could, because they didn't want to have to optically combine them any more than they had to.
The camp scene where we got to do the string and the honey, that went on for days, because there would be parts where I was in the bed and Haley was doing the honey and the string on me, and then there would be parts when she was in the bed, and you know whatever you did has to be exactly matched when we'd switch places.
For Susan Henning, her biggest challenge was making sure that she wouldn't be recognized on screen.
You'll just see me move to make sure that I'm never straight within the camera. And it was tough in a way to get used to. It's kind of a funny feeling. Here you're doing a movie and yet don't let the camera see you.
In some shots, actually, if you're quick, you can see her whole face. She turns and you can see quite clearly that it's not me.
Once you get cued in, the kids, my children, have fun. There's Mommy. Is that you, Mommy? You just think whenever there's two, it's Haley, and whenever there's a three-quarter or intermixing between, one is me.
When shots of Haley and her double were interwoven with UB iWorks split-screen effects, it became easy for audiences to forget that there is only one Haley Mills.
I mean, this was a challenge like had never been done. And when we finished, the feeling was just exultation. It worked, because we were terrified all the way through the picture that it wasn't going to work.
It's amazing.
Oh, she's simply delightful.
Comedy is quite difficult.
Charming woman. It's amazing how he ever let her slip away from him.
You have to be able to have fun and portray that sense of fun to the audience watching you.
Bye, Vicky. Watch out for snakes. What is it? You give your sister her half of this.
I am the woman you love to hate.
We're not sisters. I've never seen her before in my life.
The key scene in Parent Trap was the tenth scene when the two sisters discover their sisters.
There's more to it than just switching places.
Susan was pretending to be Sharon and Sharon Susan. And then I think everybody started to get a bit confused because I was often confused.
Surprise!
The matching of the two girls,
Both of them?
we were terrified all the way through the picture that it wasn't going to work.
I meet people all the time and have letters all the time, still to this day, from people who say that The Parent Trap was a very important film for them. It was a very significant film in their life, that they found it a really empowering movie because the children, you know, take charge of the situation.
We're in trouble. You'll have to bring Mother out here immediately.
And bring it to a very satisfactory conclusion.
The best films, I think, are where you have a cast of competent people and a wonderful script.
I knew something would go wrong.
Nothing has gone wrong.
Nothing's
when
gone
I got
wrong.
here, she'd already unpacked.
She's going to spend the night. Mitch, I won't have that.
Now, wait a minute. You're reading implications into...
I have to give credit to one marvelous piece of talent that Walt hired. He had a knack for hiring good talent, and one of the most important, was a fellow named Bill Dover, who ran his story department for him. Bill was an insatiable reader, and he found The Parent Trap as a short novelette, this German author, about two little German girls who meet in camp and switch places, and convinced Walt to buy it. Walt gave it to me. What do you think? I said, I think it's a winner. And he said, let's go on it. And about 6 weeks later, we had a first draft script.
In The Parent Trap, the fact that the parent separated these twins and never told the other one that they had a twin somewhere in the world is extraordinary, but, you know, that's the story.
You can't get into that too much. You'd say it and get by it, but they did want to switch places and meet their parents. The basic kernel was there, and all we did was switch the locale to California and Boston, make one girl a proper Bostonian and the other a little wild, rebellious Californian girl with a dude ranch father. Perfect story for Haley Mills.
Walt was trying to get as much out of Haley as he could while she was still that certain age, on the verge of womanhood, but not quite there yet, you know, and she was so good at that, and such a delightful young lady as well, that I think if he'd had 8 more scripts and enough time to do it, he would have done them too with her.
It's a simple story of 2 girls and 2 parents and a 3rd woman.
Oh, divine. Oh, Mitch, she's simply breathtaking.
I was just thinking the same thing about you, dear.
At my age. Oh, you are a sweet child.
My love for David Swift started the day I read his script. I was in New York when my agent called to say there had been a request from the Disney studios for me to do a movie. And I said, naturally, send me the script. So he sent me the script, and it was wonderful. And then he's so wonderful as a director, kind, good, strict, listens, contradicts, and gives you great confidence in yourself. So that's David Swift.
Sometimes a writer gets words a little too tricky and they have to untwist them, and I don't mind doing that on a set if a line can be rewritten simpler. I also tell the actors, if they can give this emotion without dialogue, please do so, because that's what this is all about. It's a camera that photographs the workings in your head, and we'll see it in your eyes.
There you are. Now, do you two get to know each other?
Yes. We had a lovely little talk.
I can only remember rewriting some of the Joanna Barnes lines, simply because it didn't fit the location. When you're writing these scripts, you can't tell how long it takes to get from one place to another in your directions. So sometimes we had to either eliminate or add dialogue to cover that distance of travel.
It was a wonderful script, and, you know, the Disney machine was going to be behind it, and it was going to, you know, be very appealing to families and children.
Get me out of this stinking fresh air!
I had no idea how to shoot twins when I came on this show.
where you'd have the two Haleys speaking to one another. They would shoot that in a combination of ways. They would do it through the sodium traveling matte process, they could do it through split screen, or they could do it as a series of over-the-shoulders.
Are you thinking what I'm thinking?
Ub Iwerks, who animated Mickey Mouse, came back to have quite another career as our resident technical genius. Ub had discovered this process called sodium vapor. Today we call it either blue screen or green screen, and we do the same thing with it.
It was very experimental, and it was very exciting, I'm sure, for the time.
We shot some, and then they went back to just shooting regular scenes for a week while we put this first deal together to see how it was going to work. So we sat there, fingers crossed and nervous, but the first ones just worked exactly as planned.
Can you imagine what it must have been like to get these results back and see such an effect created for the very first time?
What did we do?
Traveling mats and the split screens were probably doubled or tripled as a result of the first day they saw them put together. And they decided the picture was going to really be super.
It was just delightful. When you're doing something with split screens, so much of it is mechanics.
When Ub came on the set, everybody looked to him as sort of the technical guru, and the directors relied heavily on Ub's skills to achieve the best results. Today, everything is done digitally, whereas back then it was all photochemical mats, and it was a very much more tangible process and difficult to achieve. It really took a visionary like Ub Iwerks to be able to see what the final result was going to be.
What are you saying?
The traveling matte process was an amazing revolution. When he came out with that, Disney was ahead of the game from any other studio in the industry at that time. They were doing things nobody else was doing. You could shoot an actor in the foreground, you could shoot a background, completely different location.
The day that we go for our walk in the park in Boston, we didn't actually go to a park in Boston, we were in the studios. And our walk was actually on a kind of treadmill.
As I wouldn't remember it.
I remember. And she had to walk on the treadmill and burst into song. Now, I thought that was a very difficult thing to do.
What he did is laying the groundwork for much of the work that Pixar does today and other computer graphic companies.
There were several scenes where we were able to use this stand-in.
We would alternate positions at different times. Whenever there's two, it's Haley.
Is it cold in here? I'm hot. Want a fig Newton?
And whenever there's a three-quarter or intermixing between, one is me.
Turn it down over there.
I was very embarrassed when I had to do the dress scene, and I couldn't understand why I had to do that. Couldn't I use my hand and have her up looking back? Well, she can't be down here with her face and be up there, so I was that twin that was standing with her back to the rail, and she cut out and let my little bottom and my legs show. But I got to get even because then she had to walk into the dance floor and do the dancing. Our privacy was protected, and it almost was like diapers. We were so well padded.
I made certain of that. I had about 10 pairs of underpants on. And then they start fighting together. Well, that was mayhem that day. It was glorious mayhem. And I played one part in the fight, played Susan first in the fight and then Sharon, or was it the other way around? I can't quite remember now, but we rolled around and anything went. You could pick up a large piece of cake and throw it at somebody with impunity. And at one point David said, well, pick up this, it was like a sort of custard pie in a plate, but it was just a lot of sort of foam. Picked it up and rammed it happily into Susan Henning's face, you know. Oh, that was a good job. And they said, all right, all change. Then, of course, I had to go on and change my clothes and then be Susan and get the pie pushed in my own face, which was a very interesting bit of instant karma. I've never forgotten that.
They had dabs of cake and ice cream all over my face, but you can still see she has these beautiful, big, round, piercing blue eyes, and I have more of a pale gray eyes. And if you look carefully, that's a good time to see the difference of us face front.
Leon Charles was the, quote, dialogue coach, unquote, on the picture. Leon was a good help. He got their lines so they weren't afraid of the lines, and he rehearsed scenes with the children. He never superimposed any directorial comments, but he just rehearsed the actors in their parts, which was a great help because they got to bounce back and forth, and then I would get them ready to go to rehearse, and I'd say, I want you to forget everything that you had, forget all the cues, forget what other actors said to you at all. We're changing the whole story around. And that would shock them, and then I'd say, no, we're not changing the story, but I want you to forget what happened. And then we'd start fresh. They'd cleanse their minds, and we'd start again. I said, you've never heard this dialogue before. This is the first time you're hearing it. And that alerted them, and their eyes opened up, and then they do the scene properly.
In my memory of any particular director I've ever had, it was David at the top. First he would set the stage of what he was expecting. Stay here, do... Not how to do something, but what the parameters. They were so firm that you were so at ease knowing you knew what he wanted and you could give it to him. He allowed your creative, artistic character to come out. So we were able to be ourselves, and yet in a very definite circumstance.
The key scene in Parent Trap is the scene between the two girls in the tent when they're sent to the tent for punishment, and they discover they're sisters.
Don't you find it peculiar that we both look so much alike and have the same birthday? It's just one of those things, isn't it?
She was the right one to dig for that secret.
Will you come inside a minute? Please?
It wouldn't have worked the other way for the California girl to do it. If they don't get the emotional impact of that scene, you're dead in the water for the rest of the film because nobody will care. And Haley just did it to perfection.
It's my mother. But it's my mother, too.
Everything I wanted out of that scene, she came through with beautifully, with very little coaching.
Lunch. You go. I'm not hungry.
She had you on the verge of tears at that point. So you really cared about them and seeing their parents, and you believed all of that.
Golly. Sisters.
Yep, that little child was a marvel.
The confusion between Sharon playing Susan and Susan playing Sharon arose with the accent. It got a little bit confusing when Susan's Boston so-called accent slipped and Sharon's American so-called accent slipped.
My very own father.
Own father?
Father.
Father.
She was assuming an accent anyway. What wasn't acceptable, of course, is when Susan's American accent slipped, because she was American. But hopefully those little slip-ups were acceptable and understandable. In fact, I think there was one scene where I wasn't sure who I was supposed to be, and that's the scene coming down the stairs when they're both dressed identically, and they try to fool Mum and Dad, but they don't know, and I don't think we knew who we were. I don't know who we were.
Sharon, go right upstairs and put your suit on now. Go on.
Are you sure she's Sharon?
Of course she is. Aren't you?
The Sherman Brothers came up with a perfect song for The Parent Trap.
We had the dinner staged. That was part of the script, but we didn't have the entertainment staged. There was no number. I was shooting and left my script up on the third floor of the studio, and I ran up fast in between shots of rehearsal and to get my script, and as I was rushing back down, Walt came out and grabbed me in the hallway. He said, "Bud, come here, I want you to meet two guys." I said, "Walt, I don't have time." He says, "It's my studio, come with me." Well, he had a good point there. I think either do it or go find another job. So I went with him. He says, "I want you to meet these two fellas," and he said, they're talented musicians, I think you'll like them. Dick and Bob Sherman. And they sit down at a piano in his office, and they play this tune called For Now, For Always. And I thought right away, I said, that's one of the most beautiful love songs I've ever heard.
For now, for always, our love will stay as warm as summer, for come what may.
And then Walt said, now play the other one, where the two girls dance together. I said, wait a minute, that's not in the script. And he said, but listen to this. And they sang this song, let's get together, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they played, and I said, what do you know? let's think about that. He said, Walt says, no, we're not going to think about it. We're going to do it. And I said, oh, okay, Walt. That was the first intimation I had that we were going to do a musical number.
Yeah was before the Beatles. Yeah, that was before we said, let's get together, yeah. And they said, she loves you, yeah. It was not quite the same.
I tried to get Walt to cut the violin playing, but he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't cut anything. God bless him.
He used to, when we were making the film, Parent Trap, he used to come down on the set, not every day, but almost every day. And our director, David Swift, would close the set to honor the head of the studio. And Disney would tell us how wonderful the Rushes were and how pleased he was and how we were all so wonderful and the photography was wonderful and we were all very thrilled, and we'd stand there with our mouths open and listen to him, and then he'd say goodbye, and we'd open up the set again and go back to work.
When Walt Disney walked onto the set here, and all the crew and everybody, craft services and everybody saying, "Hi, Uncle Walt," I thought, isn't that the nicest thing? Isn't that darling? I mean, these people are crazy about the man.
We'd sit and he'd tell us stories, or we were just part of a family.
You know, the whole cast was incredible. It really, really was. And of course, then we had a director, David Swift, and nobody was better than him.
You don't need a director for this kind of a cast.
He was wonderful and a fine, fine writer. He wrote a magnificent script, and it was a compliment to all of us to perform his work. And it's amazing how popular that movie really is.
Ruth, she was a darling, marching across that dam with the Colonel Bogey March.
They needed lots of extras for that, so they took actually the girls from the neighboring camps, and they were the girls that marched behind the extras that were in the film. I don't think David was happy that day.
I was so furious because I'd worked for hours to get those little girls to lead off with their left foot, and they were all, couldn't march at all. I understand that the studio has some behind-the-camera footage of me yelling at the girls. I can remember now, as the girls are marching, and I was furious with them because they wouldn't march like soldiers. I remember running out there and yelling, "Left, left, right, left." And one of them was marching with her left foot, going with the left arm going. It was a dreadful, straggly, waggly procession. But I guess in the end, it was better that way because they're little girls. They're not soldiers.